Hello, and thank you for joining us here on News 6 Plus. I am streaming executive producer Thomas Mates. Today, across the country, Americans are taking the time to remember the life and legacy of the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, James Earl Carter Jr., though he rarely went by his full name. He was a peanut farmer born in Plains, Georgia, who went on to become a naval officer before serving as a one-term governor of Georgia and then coming on to be a one-term president of the United States, beating out Gerald Ford before ultimately losing his presidency in 1980 to Ronald Reagan. The president died on Sunday at his home in Plains, Georgia. He was the first president to live to 100 years old, and now there is a flurry of planning happening going toward his memorial service and funeral, which will be coming on January 9th, as he has a state funeral. Of course, there will be several memorial services before then. For a little bit of perspective on that and what all goes into a presidential funeral and the planning thereof, both the coverage and the actual service itself, we're joined now by manager of content and coverage here at News 6, Phil Landeros. Phil, how are you doing today?
Good, Thomas. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. And so, Phil, we're turning to you today because you worked in Atlanta for some time, and that is where a big portion of President Carter's memorial services will be held at the Carter Center there. Give us kind of like the broad strokes of what we can expect in the coming days, and then we'll take a look at sort of the media side of things and how it's a very choreographed event that takes place across several states and locations, and if you could just walk us through some of that.
Sure, I went to work in Atlanta at the CBS affiliate in 2017, and I was kind of surprised once I first got there about how much Jimmy Carter was a part of the everyday community in Atlanta and in Georgia. Everybody knew about him. He was revered there for lots of different reasons that we could get into. Um, but as soon as I got there, we started talking about funeral plans. He had brain cancer at that particular time, and that's when I got to learn a lot about the plans for when President Carter died. And it's the Carter Foundation, the Carter Center, that is actually in Atlanta that does the main planning for this. And former presidents have a set plan already as to what their funeral arrangements are going to be. They take part in that planning far ahead of time. And as soon as I got there, I took part in what could be considered rehearsals for that funeral. The Carter Foundation collaborated with all of the local TV stations and CNN in that market to go through what would happen if and when President Carter died, and how we would be able to cover that. So we did it as a pool situation. And so for people who aren't familiar, lots of television stations do what are called pools to cover big events. Lots of times here in Orlando, it'll be for big court events. So that way we'll always have a camera in the courtroom, and then everybody gets that feed of that. So there's a really thick kind of planner that came out when I got there in 2017, and it assigned out which TV station would have which camera where and when. The police and the city were involved in those rehearsals as well. They didn't actually do a processional. It was just a matter of getting everybody to where they're supposed to be at whatever time uh, during that memorial service, and getting live shots up and making sure everybody could see those live shots so they could be sent out to the world. And so every network would have multiple shots to look at. And I think we've seen this shot we're looking at right now in front of the presidential library. There are live pictures of that probably being brought by someone in that pool. I think it is actually my old station that's doing the pool right at the Carter Center today, and that was set up long ago. That there would be live pictures constantly up day and night from the Carter Center and from other locations in Atlanta. And those Atlanta stations also send teams down to Plains, Georgia, where Jimmy Carter lived and where he died and where he's going to be buried. Um, in the coming days. And it was just fascinating to look at the type of extraordinary planning that goes into planning a state funeral for a former president.
Yeah, and some people may think it's a little odd to be planning something like this so far in advance. Some people might even consider it ghoulish in some way. But as you said, the president himself was a part of this planning. His foundation has been a part of this planning. This is going to be a large international event, not just a national day of mourning. Carter was known for his diplomacy and for his work in bringing peace to the Middle East and around the world, and was actually given the Nobel Peace Prize for that. So this will be a massive event. And as you mentioned, this was happening in 2017. Carter was of an advanced age then and had been dealing with cancer, as you said. So this has been something that's been anticipated for some time, but now that it's happening, all these dominoes are sort of falling.
Yeah, and the reason for all that planning and why they bring the media into for these type of rehearsals is they want to make sure that everything happens right and is respectful as the memorial services go on. It's going to be a very emotional time for Atlanta and for Georgia. For those who don't know the history, Jimmy Carter was the only U.S. president from the deep South after the Civil War, and he barely eked out in his in his primary in 1976 against a pro-segregation Democrat who was from his neighboring state of Alabama. It was actually Florida that put him over the top in that primary race, and so he's a symbol of change for the Deep South, for getting out of the Jim Crow laws, and for that time he was quite a progressive person, and that's remembered to this day by everyone in Atlanta and in Georgia. So it's very important to them. And then everything, of course, he achieved during his presidency and after his presidency. He's well known for the peace accords, the Camp David Accords with Egypt while he was president, and then after that, it was he set out to cure diseases in Africa and South America, and then of course everybody's seen his Habitat for Humanity efforts for years, and I think as recently as I would say we have video from I think 2018, 2019. We're looking at that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Even after he had brain cancer, when he and Rosalynn, his wife, would go out and work on these houses. That's what they did multiple times every year, and it's not just a photo op. Their plan was, and their idea was, to promote other people going out and doing the same thing, and it's really taken root in all across the country. In fact, that's a story we're working on for our news this afternoon. We're talking to local uh, Habitat for Humanity around
Officials,
the area,
organizers.
and they're telling us the importance of that Jimmy Carter connection as far as getting people to donate money, A, or B, donate their time to help get these houses built for low income people. So it's quite a legacy he leaves behind.
Absolutely. He's perhaps one of the few presidents whose legacy is marked more by what he did outside of office than what he did in office. As we mentioned, he was a one-term president. His presidency was marred by several difficult times, an energy crisis, the Iran hostage crisis, and things like that. Although, as you mentioned, his international affairs with the Egypt peace accords, Egypt and Israel peace accords were groundbreaking at the time, and due primarily to his just stubbornness to not let the leaders of Israel or Egypt leave Camp David until a deal was struck. And as and that all goes into the enormity of the event that's to come in the coming days. And so what we know so far is he will definitely be lying in state at the Carter Center in Atlanta, and then in D.C. before he is eventually interred in his hometown of Plains, Georgia. Can you walk us through a little bit some of the logistics that go into that, insofar as the coverage? At least I know you had mentioned that there's already
Sure.
going to be people stationed at all across the city as there's a processional in Atlanta and beyond.
So we're already seeing some of the information about the memorials and funeral plans that are out, and from everything I've read this morning, it's very similar to what the plan was back in 2017. They probably make tweaks to that as time goes by, but there will be a service in Washington. We'll probably see uh, all of the living former presidents there at that service.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see dignitaries from all around the world. Then he'll lie in state in D.C., and then he'll also lie in repose at the Carter Center, where there'll be more memorials and visitations, and then he'll be brought to his hometown in Plains for his burial. We're going to see every step of that way. All of that planning has been going on for so long. So um, for the next, I believe I haven't. I believe the ninth was the date
January
they were
9th,
talking
yes.
about. Yeah, 8th or ninth. And so that'll be day and night coverage. You're going to see live video and live pictures from all three of those locations for all of those days. And then you'll also see all sorts of memorials and the city had previously had a plan to drape certain areas in purple bunting in the city of Atlanta in memory of President Carter. As those events go on in the city, you'll see a lot of people from all generations involved in these memorial services as the days come forward. And he's got a very large family. One of his grandson ran for governor and was a state senator in Georgia. He's been the spokesman for the family for the last several years, so we could expect him to speak. But so many children and grandchildren and great grandchildren.
Hmm.
You may remember his wife Rosalynn died just last November,
Hmm.
and that's when his health started going downhill. He's been in hospice for longer than that. Um, but he did vote in November. He made a big point of making a public appearance to vote
Hmm.
in Georgia for president, and that's kind of the last we've heard of him.
Yeah, and this is, people may remember just a few years back we saw similar fanfare and memorial services for President George H.W. Bush, another one-term president, the father of George W. Bush, and similarly there was a lot of planned events with that. Coordinating between memorial services in Texas and Washington, D.C., having him lie in repose in the Capitol Rotunda, which I imagine will happen also with President Carter as well, so that all of his, contemporaries and people who have worked with him throughout the years can pay their respects. And as you said, there were plans for that well in advance.
Yeah, that the Bush funeral was also and memorials was also a very elaborate a planned out situation, and you can tell that when you look back at all that information. I remember specifically there was a train where I believe he was buried in College Station, where his presidential library is, but he lived in Houston, and there was a old timey train that brought his body from Houston to its final resting place in College Station, Texas, and that's stuff that's been planned for a long time and has been rehearsed. And again, the reason they do that stuff is because they know there's going to be so many eyes on this, and they want to make sure that it's respectful, and they want to make sure that everything goes off without a hitch, and they send off these former presidents in grand style.
I am sorry, I just realized my mic was off.
I thought I lost you there for a second.
Yes, yes. So I apologize for that. As I was saying, that live coverage, that round the clock coverage, has already begun here. We're taking a live look at Plains, Georgia, where President Carter was born and where he ultimately died, where he lived outside of the White House after his presidency. And we'll be seeing this continuously from now through January 9th, as the country and the world mourns the former president.
Yeah, and Plains is a really small place. The whole world is kind of descending on Plains right now,
Hmm.
where everybody is just a huge, it's a very tiny place. Everybody's just a huge fan of the Carter family and all they've done for that area, and for the state of Georgia and for the United States as well. So you can expect a lot of emotion out of there in the coming days.
For certain. And we'll be continuing to cover this as the president lies in state in Georgia and at the Capitol, and before his ultimate burial in Plains, Georgia. Phil, thank you so much for giving us your time and your insight on everything that goes into this event, and everything that we can expect in the coming days. Of course, we'll have more this evening, starting on News 6 at 4, as News 6 investigator Mike DeForest is looking back at the legacy and the the memories of President Carter and all that he contributed to both the United States and the world. We'll have that again starting at 4 o'clock this evening, and you can find more on clickorlando.com. Phil, again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for joining us. Absolutely.